Hi, my name is Jason Kelmigian. I'm an industrial associate with Signature Associates in Southfield. My goal today is to teach you a thing or two about saving some time in dealing with cannabis transactions. Hopefully we can get that done. I'm going to share a PowerPoint with you. I've got a couple videos, and I'm going to talk a lot, but there's a lot of information, also in this PowerPoint that I'm not going to get into. So feel free to use this at your own disposal. We'll make sure you get a copy of it. And hopefully it's a good introduction into some of the processes and ways, again, that you can save time and close some deals in cannabis real estate. So we're calling it the Green Rush. And a brief overview: since Michigan adopted cannabis in 2018, I've had a special interest in the real estate side of things. I've completed a handful of them now at this point, but it seems like over the last really 6 months is when it's really taken off for me, as far as my activity level and my interest in the industry. The last 2 years I've been working at it. I'd say the last 6 months it's really kind of all accumulated into a lot of information that I've been able to put together and process. So what we're dealing with now is we've got 5 licenses in Michigan. There's growing, processing, testing facilities, transport facilities, and the hardest to achieve, which is the retail facility, the dispensary. COVID began, and a lot of municipalities that were in the process of passing laws for cannabis were put on halt. Those meetings all stopped. Things moved to Zoom. So with that happening, I saw an increase in activity in the markets that were already existing and already had the legislation for green zones. Those markets, the activity picked up tremendously. And I think that had a lot to do with the halt that COVID put on legislation and just the interruption that it put into a lot of people's lives. So people were looking for a thing to do, for something to do, and in focusing on their cannabis projects, which for a lot of people is a side business or wasn't their main thing, is now turning into a main business and a main source of revenue for a lot of people. So again, my goal today is to provide you with valuable information that's going to help you define your role as the real estate expert in facilitating these transactions. I don't want to talk about the tax revenue and the sales volume for flower and what the prices are for. It's just not necessarily relevant for what we're going to discuss. Mainly time-saving methods or just shortcuts or answers to questions you may have had about, man, how do I even get started doing this? Where do I begin? And that's kind of what I want to show you, is that it's not as hard as you might think it is. There's only a few questions that you have to be able to answer. And we're going to get right into that. So some of my background and experience, it's my 4th year as a real estate salesperson, my 4th year on the streets, really trying to make a name for myself. So my early focus was in industrial real estate, specifically I-96, like the Livonia area. It's a really competitive market out there, a lot of experienced brokers and companies that have their guys, and it wasn't leading to immediate success. That's kind of what I like to do. So I had a high school friend that gave me a lead for cannabis that said, hey, I have a buddy that grows. And I said, okay, I'll give him a call and see what he's looking for. So, we ended up having a pretty long conversation, and I thought I got off the phone. I was like, wow, this is really interesting. This sounds like a real need. There's got to be more people looking for this. Why aren't more people helping these guys find these buildings? I just had all sorts of questions, and he was sort of right there to answer all those for me. So I got my education that way through working on these deals and working with these operators. And one of the things I've learned is that you have to have a list of 100 contacts in the industry in order to get a deal done. You got to have somebody you can call to get everything answered, because you're not an attorney, you're not an HVAC expert, you're not a plumber. So there's certain things as a realtor that you don't want to waste your time on. You're the zoning expert, you're the square footage expert, you're the negotiating expert. You know, your most important duty is securing the property for the operator, because the property is the hardest thing for the operator to secure. And that's a fact. All of them will tell you the same thing, that the hardest thing they have to deal with is finding buildings that they can reasonably work in. So, you know, you want to have a list of resources, and a lot of companies, it's just picking up the phone. At this point, you don't have to be afraid to call, a big HVAC company or a big plumbing company and ask them if they have experience working in these transactions. Most of them have specific people that are now doing this, as part of their job. So it's good to utilize as many resources as you can, and it'll help you to get these deals done. The most important resource, though, is an attorney. Your client needs to have a good attorney that knows the cannabis for that specific market, knows the rules and can help interpret that. Because again, as the broker, you don't want to be that person. So there are a few licenses, obviously, that we're going to talk about the most. The first one, the most common that I see as an industrial real estate broker, is the growing cultivation licenses. Typically 3 types: Class A, B, and C, 500, 1,000, 1,500 plants. Class C licenses are ideal for a 15 to 20,000 square foot building. And typically they're going to see about 1,000 amps of power. And the ceiling height should be, 15, 16 feet clear at least. They can work with lower, but 15 to 16 feet. Few columns is ideal. They're going to build out these rooms, which I'll show you, you'll see in the next slide. They're building out smaller rooms within here. So columns, they don't necessarily want a bunch of columns. And then what you'll see mixed in with a growing facility is a processing center. The processing center is totally run by what comes from the growing. So, if they're growing X amount of plants, they trim and they do all that, and then they use the process material and the processing, edibles, oils, anything outside of the flower is considered, a processing process. So that being said, they usually go hand in hand, and they're located in the same buildings, and then processing facilities are smaller, 1,000 to 5,000 square feet I haven't seen anything bigger, but I'm sure they're out there. I know they're out there. So the cultivation facilities, though, popular. There's hundreds of thousands of licensed, caregivers that were in Michigan. There's no reason why there's not going to be a lot of licensed Class A, B, and C growers. The state makes money on every single application they receive. So, and then they put it on, and then so it's interesting. The state will approve will approve somebody of yes, here's your pre-qualification for a Class C cultivation license, right? But once you're pre-approved, now you have to find a municipality to apply that license to. And that's the hardest part. And that's where brokers can provide value is okay, I got this state approval. Now, where do I take this? And you can help people answer that question. So here's some stages of like a standard cultivation center. There's a lot missing here. There's many stages, but it starts as any industrial shell, and you're going to drop your lights. You see all the HVAC and the roof, and really state-of-the-art equipment. The lights, the color changes to yellow once they turn on the actual lights they're going to be using in their grow. The top right photo has LEDs, but then they switch to more of a yellow, like a UAV kind of light. And that's why the picture looks yellow. Same thing in the bottom left. It's a clear photo because you can see they have their LEDs on. That's more of a final, crop photo. So, and then in the bottom right, it's just the goes from the pots into the drying room, and they're hanging upside down there to dry them out, and then they'll go to trim. This is a standard process. This is a clean facility for, as an example. And, that should give you an idea of kind of what they need. These rooms are, a couple hundred square feet, 500 square feet. Sometimes they're a little bigger, 1,000 square footers. They all have their own HVAC systems, ventilation, lights, you name it. But again, not your job as a real estate professional. You just need to find them the building that works. So one of the things that we're going to do that I have included in this is sample language from Warren, the city of Warren in Macomb County. It's just this city who I decided to use because they've already passed the ordinance, and it's not, there's not going to be any issues with me using their language. So, kind of starting right where we left off with the growers and the processors, there's going to be rules on where they can be located. This is an example of one of them, M1 through M4 zoning. It also needs to be 500 feet from planned unit development, public park, public library, religious institution, 1,000 feet from a school. So there are rules there. And then, residential obviously, needs to be 500 feet away from the following: R1, R2, those are all residential zones. So it can't be near homes either. So it's a difficult product to find. It's out there, but there's less of this product available than of the total industrial product in a particular city. Here I've got an example of a facility one of my clients is putting up in Bredesen, Michigan. They've got phase 1 pretty much completed. They've got phases planned up to 8. They've got a lot of land up there. They've got the utilities. And this is the most common grow setup we're seeing in Michigan, in my opinion, so far, is, smaller towns, or even if it's a bigger town, but just away from kind of the southeast area, because the southeast has been slower than the rest of the state. It just presents a lot more opportunity, when a city says, come on in, here's our utilities, it's going to lead to a lot of success. So if you can find cities like that, it's important to know where they are, because, again, construction, these buildings are going up all over the place. So we'll get into it. Here's a quick video. Let's see what they're doing. So in that video, you may have seen that the building is actually fairly close to some residential homes. Depending on the municipality you're in, there may not be a restriction on residential homes. There may be a restriction on religious institutions or parks, though, or schools, right? So it all depends on how the city itself is laid out. And that can all be found in the ordinance, which is where, I found that cut out from Warren. The ordinances can be found online most of the time, and I discussed that later, so I don't want to give too much away. So this is an example of what a cultivation layout would look like for a 20,000 square foot building. This is an engineered plan. It's an approved plan. And I believe they're breaking ground on this in a couple weeks. This was one of my clients. I can't really say where it is, but they have 500 plant rooms set up with these 1, 2, 3 rooms here, and then same thing on this side. Right here on this side, you've got these 3 bigger rooms, and that would be where your plants are. So each room there is designed to hold 500 plants. The processing center is on the right side of the building. And then everything else around it is all plumbing, air quality, electrical, and anything of that nature. So it's a fairly sophisticated fairly sophisticated plan. There's a lot that goes into it. Several different experts are going to need to put their opinions in here and quote and be involved. But that's the way it is. And the final product, what we're left with as realtors, is a really nice industrial product. This is taking a building is just not up to date for today's standards, and it's really turning it into almost a brand new facility is what it's doing. So the more of these types of transformations that we're going to see, just the overall, it's going to benefit the industrial value of buildings for a while to come here. So another example of a license would be the provisioning centers. This is where you can, sell and people off the street, consumers can come in and buy the products. COVID has made that somewhat interesting. Places they put in temporary rules to allow provisioning centers to for curbside delivery, right? Or actually delivery, driving it to your door. So there's been a big push forward in that sense of how we're going to sell this product. We're going to allow them to sell it. It's going to be hard to go back to, saying no, they can't do these deliveries or sales outside anymore. Now that they've passed these rules, and it appears to be working fairly well. So hopefully those don't remain temporary, because I know most people enjoy not having to enter the facility. They can order or curbside or do whatever. So one of the things with provisioning centers is typically it's more of a retail zone. The growers are going to be held into general industrial, but for provisioning centers, they're going to be in the commercial zoning most of the time. Usually it's a more strict commercial zoning. It's a lot of the same rules, distances from, the same parks, schools, religious institutions, but even more strict on, which businesses it can be near. Sometimes it can't be close to pawn shops, or, it's all written, all defined in ordinances that it's our job as a broker, again, to qualify the property. So to know what all those nearby restrictions are. And if the building zones in and does that, you've done your job, and then you need to negotiate the rest of the due diligence. As far as the application, engineering, you can assist your client with that, but they really need to be the ones that are spearheading that part of it. If they're qualified, if they're serious, they will actually, you won't have to do much after the property is negotiated, it's under contract, and you're going to obtain licensing, other than survey, standard due diligence stuff. So a little more detail into the provisioning license. It is definitely the most difficult license to obtain. Most cities, you're going to have increased competition, and with increased competition, you also have a limit on the number of facilities that they're going to allow. There's an intense application process, and the due diligence windows, don't expect to receive a commission payment anytime soon. Once you get a retail center under contract, or a hoping to be retail center. I say it's the most difficult to obtain, again, for these reasons. The strict zoning rules, it's limited. Commercial zoning is typically, a main thoroughfare, one road, and it's hard to avoid all the restrictions that they're going to have on what types of businesses it can't be near. And especially if there's a residential kicker in there, that really makes provisioning centers locations hard to find. So a lot of times you'll see the zoning kind of centered around a certain area in a city that they want developed. And you can't really blame them for that. If there's a city that could use the development that hasn't had anything new happen in decades, then this is an opportunity to have a new building, produced, or, an older building rehabbed. And a lot of cities are taking advantage of that opportunity, where they're saying, no, you can't be located here because it's too close to to the central business district, but you can be located here. And it's a risk on the operator's end, but if they want to be in that city, they have to do it, right? That's, if this is where they can be located, then that's where you should be looking. So the limit on the number of facilities, Bay City up north, they did 50, and it's driven the value of facilities down tremendously. $350,000, I think, for some existing dispensaries up there. But when you look at Southfield, who they have issued conditional approval on 3 licenses. Those deals are in the $8 million to $12 million range. And there's, again, that's Southfield. And it just gives you an idea of the value of when they approve 50 licenses, or they say they're going to do 50, competition goes down, because almost everybody's going to get it. Southfield, they say they're going to approve 3, and there's already only 15 buildings that qualify. The value of those 3 is going to be tremendously higher, especially in a city with the traffic counts and the demographic, the daytime, even the nighttime traffic. Southfield is going to increase with those facilities. So that's something that they look for when they're passing, any zoning, any area this facility can be located in. Think about it from the city's perspective. Why would this work for the city? Why is this a good site for the city? Because that's really the question that you need to answer. So, there's some language here on the right side, that limit the licenses. All right. So the review process for the provisioning licenses, where the most controversy is, there's a lot of controversy around it. And it depends on the process that they're running. So in this example, it's a point system, and this is what they did in Warren. Warren, without going into too much detail, is in a lawsuit with a bunch of the applicants that are suing for malpractice and a lot of other reasons because they got denied licenses. And anyways, they haven't issued any licenses yet. They said they were going to do 15, but they haven't issued any yet. This has been ongoing for a year. So then they're still in that same position. So the way that they had set it up was a medical, marijuana review committee was going to review applicants, review applications on a case-by-case basis. So essentially, they were going to rate them from 0 to 10 based on, the criteria that's listed, below: integrity, moral character, reputation, personal, business, probably. So you can imagine with that criteria how that leaves a lot of potential for some issues to arise with how they're scoring people. There's a lot of reputations involved with this type of with these operations, and there could be some reasons why certain people get denied, that they think are more personal. And that's why, this is a tough process to go through. It's very competitive. It's tough. So with the initial license approval, they were going to approve the scores and all this. But basically, the important thing here is just the visual here on the left side. If you ever have the chance to check out you're probably going to need to go to a recreational dispensary. But, if you ever have the chance to go inside, just go inside, bring your ID, but go inside and see what these things are all about. It's first-class service most of the time. It's not attracting the wrong crowd, like a lot of people think. They're very professional establishments, all the ones I've been to. And, as a realtor, it's good to know the product, know what you're dealing with. So when you talk to these people on the phone, you can speak the language with them. So, here's, I've got an example of a video from Exclusive in Ann Arbor. They're a vertically integrated company. They grow, which means they grow, process, and sell on the same grounds, under the same roof. To me, that's the perfect setup, right? You're growing your own product and you're selling it out your own door. I mean, that's the dream, right? So they're really well set up. I've been there a couple times. I'm calling my client, whatever. I've worked with them, and they are extremely friendly. And here's a good example why. I mean, this is a great video. This is a result of COVID. One of the things that they had to do, and it's a great idea. YouTube. Again, a great example of, of a company that's already doing it. That's really, that's really trying to make a push for this whole, legitimate cannabis industry. I mean, the facilities that they operate are state of the art. They're beautiful industrial facilities. So yeah, so moving forward, here's an example of a safety compliance facility. It's a testing report from, a certain strain, Gulf of Tonkin, it looks like down here. And it says, pass, but this is one of the examples. This is something that every grower is going to know what this is. And a small portion of their product gets picked up by a testing facility, a member of a testing facility, and they bring that little, vial back to their lab, and they test it for harmful chemicals, pesticides, anything that the, Michigan, the state health department, that they've deemed harmful to the consumers. So that's the testing lab's job, to test for all that. And there is a need for that in real estate. And but each city, there's going to be less testing facilities than there will be growers. So it's like, the doctor, they're like the doctors for growers. There's more patients than there are doctors, so essentially, each city that opts into this might end up with maybe 1-2 compliance centers. I'd be surprised if they had a need for any more. They keep them farther away from existing operation, from grow operations and retail centers. And that's mainly for the purpose of preventing collusion and any problems. If you go on Google, I'm sure you can find some stories of, a testing company putting past results on a bad batch. That's happened. It's definitely going to happen. So in what's supposed to happen too, once a bad batch is discovered, the product is supposed to be burned. And I've had clients tell me that wasn't the best day of their lives when they had to watch that happen, but that's the rules they have to play by. And they shaped up because of it. They bought some new lights, and that's what happens. They changed their practices because, we didn't realize that was going to happen. So that's the whole point of why they're having these test centers. So from a real estate perspective, the testing centers are no different than a dental lab or a doctor's office. They just have that added level of security, for cannabis. So you're going to have more cameras, and the front door, the entrance for the public, they're not going to be coming in there. But if anybody did, they wouldn't be able to get to the back. There's going to be a secure door there. So that's really the kicker. I mean, they need okay plumbing, and the ability for ventilation. And ventilation, the smell, again, you're dealing with such small quantities, small, a pill bottle size, that the smell, the odor, other tenants, it's not going to affect them. They're never going to have that much product where it's going to smell. It's a pretty legit setup. So with the testing centers, again, similar to dental lab, doctor's office, they can be located in multi-story buildings. Sometimes, again, it all depends on the zoning ordinance. They can be on the 3rd or 4th floor as long as they're comfortable with using an elevator. But again, nobody's going to know, really who they are or what they're doing. So they'll just look like anybody else getting in an elevator. And that's really, the full coverage on testing facilities. I mean, 3,000 square feet. Maybe one day, a bigger lab would need, up to 10,000, but I don't see the need for labs at this point getting any bigger than 10,000 square feet. The supply is still catching up to the demand. So for secure transporters, not much of a retail. Probably the lowest value is a real estate agent that we can work on. They don't need much real estate. There's only 6 or 7 transport licenses that have been issued in the state. The reason for that is the state wants to be able to keep a really close eye on the products, because they're tracking every single product that leaves. Every plant is tracked by the state. So the transport companies are really important in that process. So the state isn't going to issue, they're not going to have, a lot of transport companies. I believe these transport companies will be able to be bought out, to have new owners and restructured, but it's going to be difficult to add more transport companies if the state is going to want to continue tracking all of this, product every day. Each company probably has 10 to 20 Sprinter vans. Some are smaller. They might have, under 10 vans, but, up to 20 vans that are going to be located anywhere in the state at any given time. And there's apps and, technology these guys use to keep track of where they are. And, that's really the transport business. Is there's not much opportunity for us as realtors. They don't need real estate as much. So where can it be located? Again, this is kind of going back, but this is a very nice picture of flower. But is questions that you should ask, like, is the broker, is there a setback from existing schools? Are there buffer zones that I have to adhere to? What are the zoning requirements? Can it be in general industrial, light industrial, L1, L2, M1 through M4, heavy industrial? Does one license work for this? Can I do co-located facilities? Can I have a grower, a processor, and a retailer, a dispensary all under the same roof? Are there any prohibited areas? I think I had mentioned, central business districts like Royal Oak. If they decide to move forward with cannabis legislation, there's not going to be a dispensary on Main Street. There might be one on just outside of the city, on 14 mile or 11 mile or something, but you're not going to see one in the central walking business district. We haven't seen that yet. And, not even really nationally. There's only a handful of those. Most cities want to keep them sort of in areas that could use the development, could use the increased traffic, that sort of thing. So these are good questions to ask yourself when you're looking at, how's this location? So then once you've got the location, it depends on what you want to do first. If you want to find the location first, or if you want to find the license availability first, it really doesn't matter, because they're going to lead you to the same thing. So for the license availability, if you have a property that, okay, it's located in a green zone, I know it is. Now I'm going to find out if there are any licenses available. A lot of times you can get this information from the city, especially if the city is publicly opted in and there's a license or there's an application available for people to fill out. Then most cities are going to be able to answer this question for you: how many licenses are available of that specific license? So what I do is I call the city clerk, and because they're the ones who process the applications, and I'll say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm a realtor. We have a building that we're looking at in the city. We think it conforms to the zoning for this type of license. Can you let me know if there are any licenses available for that, or if are you guys accepting any applications for that type of license at this time? And depending on what their answer is, it's going to lead you to another set of questions. So what do I need to tell my client they need to do in order to apply? How much time, what do you think, when's the next meeting, the next vote? Any information that you can get that isn't going to be stepping, and there's a fine line between the information you can actually get from somebody in the city from what they're willing to give. So you have to be able to, know the questions that you're going to be able to get an answer to, not just, I have this building under contract. My client wants to know if he's going to get approved. They're not going to answer that. So you need to find out if you already know the buildings, and if you know the buildings in the zone, if you're confident, and you just need to find out if there's licenses available. So then there's no reason why it shouldn't work, and that's the whole point as the realtors. You need to provide your client with the confidence that no matter what, this building zones in. So as long as they hold up their end of the bargain, which is if they're qualified and they take it to the closing table, then it should be a great relationship between you and the buyer. But you shouldn't be expected to go out of your way so much to get the full deal done, if you understand what I mean. I mean, there's a lot of things that you should require or should expect from your buyers. So here's, once you found the building and it's determined that licenses are available. So now we got the question answered from the city clerk. Yes, there are licenses available. So what is the application process and how will winners be determined? So you can ask the city clerk here, but a lot of times too, you're gonna wanna read it, get your own interpretation of how it's gonna work. And then I always like to talk to attorneys. There are attorneys that aren't going to charge you for the time because, again, this is an ever-evolving industry. People are talking about this and learning about it every day. Attorneys are willing to answer questions because it's all just business development at this point. The more questions you answer, the more context, the more people that get interested. We'll create our own community of people who want to work on this stuff. So the city clerk and the building department, they can answer questions. Sometimes planning can too, but they're hard to get a hold of. If the application process has begun, it will be online or it will be available to be picked up in person. Sometimes it's both. It's important to know when the final date is to submit. Most municipalities won't start reviewing applications until the final application date, so it doesn't matter what order you hand it in. Obviously, we'll get into that because on the right side it says otherwise. And then they all utilize attorneys in putting these applications together. The most important thing that you can provide for this group when they're doing their application is all the information that's available on the building. Any current, old, new, whatever information that's available, environmental surveys, legal descriptions, it all helps them build their case. But ultimately, they are the ones that are putting this presentation together. You are just verifying the real estate works. So here's a few processes for determining who the lottery winners or who the license winners are for the retail licenses. And even the grow licenses, but more so for the retail licenses, like the provisioning centers. You're going to see the lottery. The lottery system is they did this in Traverse City. They're going to do this in Lincoln Park. Very few buildings in Lincoln Park, though. So if you have a building in Lincoln Park, let me know. But Traverse City, they did 7 licenses in Traverse City. There were definitely more than 7 applications filed or submitted in Traverse City. So the way the lottery works is as long as the building gets, the stamp of approval by the review committee, and that could be the fire, it could be, planning commissioner, it could be the building department, it could, whoever the authority is in that municipality, is going to determine whether or not the property is in the green zone. So if I am the broker, I would, advise my client, I would say, hey, take this purchase agreement and submit this to the city and request them to come out and review the property and if it conforms. If it conforms, you're then entered into the lottery drawing. So the lottery drawing has a cutoff date. So again, it's important to know the submitting date, the dates when things are due. But the lottery, again, it's more of an objective way to select a winner. The one negative effect of the lottery for the cities is that they don't get to pick and choose which community benefit plan is best for them. Meaning, a lot of these cities require you to promise you're going to improve a park, or you're going to, add a water tower, or fix a road, or so with the lottery system, you're kind of leaving that up to chance. Which the whole point, in my opinion, of giving the cities the right or the ability to make these decisions on their own, you would think you wouldn't choose the lottery, but it's the easiest, most effective way to avoid lawsuits on their end, because it's literally just taking their hand out of it. So that's why the lottery-based system is being utilized in some cities. It's easier to implement. The merit-based or point system is definitely the most complicated. That's Berkeley, that's Royal Oak, that's Westland. You know, the cities with limited, limited licenses, high profile. You know, it was Ferndale a little bit, but high profile cities, you know, that are gonna attract a lot of competition, a lot of operators. You know, I don't, you know, big egos might be the wrong word, but you get a bunch of people that are into this industry, and most of them are successful in other areas. So it's a competitive process. It's complicated, you know, rating somebody from 0 to 10, you know, how do you remain completely objective in that scenario is very difficult from the city perspective. So for them, it's opening them up to lawsuits and potential delays. And that's what has happened in most cities that have adopted this system. Is it's been delayed due to lawsuits, or, you know, due to whatever reason, but there's a multitude of reasons why the merit-based system is tough. But on the other hand, the one thing it does that the lottery doesn't is it allows the city to completely choose, you know, have free reign over the community benefits plan, really, and who the operator is. You know, they can actually be involved in it. So, and then there's the first come, first serve, which is Portage was a newer city that just started. Like, not just started, but I say just started, it was like 4 months ago, 5 months ago now. So they are reviewing applications, but first come, first serve just means if I, you know, have a building and I apply for a retail application, and say there's a building across the street, they're also applying, but I get it first. And now I created a 1,000-foot circle surrounding my building that nobody else can have that license. So he would almost instantly get denied. You know, he would. The building across the street would instantly be denied if I receive my license first. And that's what the first come, first serve method is. This is a great, in my opinion, I like the first come, first serve method, because what it does is, without putting a limit on the number of facilities, right? So there's no limit on the number of facilities. But if I say that if I open a shop first and nothing else can open within 1,000 feet, then the market will eventually cap itself and will run out of buildings. There won't be any more room. So the city accomplishes what they want. They don't want you know, these dispensaries, they don't want 30 dispensaries or 20. So as long as they have a distance requirement set up between them, they'll be able to control that, you know, the population of them. So it's a good method for the cities. And again, they also have the ability to approve one that's across the street over the other that might have a better community benefit plan. So it's a little bit of a combination of both. I would personally, if it's my choice, I go first come, first serve, but I'm not a city representative. So that doesn't, my opinion doesn't mean much. So here's the some information on the actual application. Again, more than you need to know as the broker, but once you get involved, and it's interesting. You'll learn this stuff just because it's part of the trade. You know, and you'll start looking at, you know, what these guys, you know, you'll start talking to operators and knowing, you know, who sounds more qualified than the other. And the more of these questions you ask them, you know, oh, do you have a plan for, you know, what you're going to do for, you know, let's see, for security plan isn't a good one. But, you know, for like floor plan and layout, do you have a simple question such as, you know, who's your architect can save you a week's worth of time. If somebody can't answer that question that wants to buy a 30,000 square foot growing facility, then they're probably not the most qualified person to talk to. They might actually have a need, but there's probably somebody else within that group that you should be talking to that can answer that question if you want to effectively spend your time as the real estate expert. So again, this is more review process stuff. I mean, like, it's no joke. There's a lot of stuff that's considered and a lot of background stuff, you know, that's going to be taken on your client. And so it's really important that they understand this, but they have to have an attorney that's going to do this with them. That's not necessarily your job. So one of the, obviously here's an important, kind of breakdown of how to value these cannabis properties, or how I go on to value these properties. And you can take, my ideas, my methods, and use them, or you can say, oh, I don't think that, really adds value or not. But, there's a lot of not, untraditional things happening with the values of real estate. And cannabis is really driving that market. In Westland very recently in July, that was their cutoff date for applications. And there's well over 40 applications in the city for, the numerous licenses, growing, processing, dispensing. And the values of those properties were, for the time being, were anywhere from 200 to 400%. Now, 6 months later, we're still figuring out which properties are gonna win the licenses. So that's, a lot of properties within a market that have been taken off the market for some time now, while this is being figured out. That's a factor. That's a fact of any cannabis. That's why it's the green rush. When the green rush hits a building, when it hits a city, all the buildings in the area are going to be gone for a set amount of time until the green rush ends, until there's no gold left. All these guys are going to stay there until it's gone. All right, so that's what's happening in Warren. That's what's happening in Berkeley is buildings are still tied up that have been tied up for over a year on 11 Mile and all these areas, because there still hasn't been a decision made. Now, you might be saying, wow, that seems silly, as a broker, why would I spend my time on this? Because to actually negotiate that deal, it only takes about a month or two. Similar to how you would negotiate any deal. You just need to, part of that negotiation is negotiating your time, or negotiating the time it's going to take, and having extensions and stoppages in place in that agreement that are going to allow you to continue the deal, if it's solely based on municipal, slow processing on the city's end of things. You can do all your normal due diligence on a property in the first 30 days and say, all right, good, we're done. Now we just got to wait for this city to pass this and we can fill out our application. So as a realtor, that's really something to consider, is how much time, are we going to tie this up for? I've got 8 or 9 that have been tied up for well over a year. I'm not going to say which cities, but they're tied up, and I talk to them, check in, and they're fine, and they're still running their business. So it's not like it's an impossible thing to find. It's just it's not going to be an instant hit. But the reason why you would, I would be willing to put that time in up front is, if somebody does open a dispensary in a prime area and they do receive one of 3 licenses, and it is, A+, if you're around for the second time of that sale, it's going to be pretty significant. If they're getting a deal at $1 million, 4,000 square foot building, licensed up and ready to go. In other states, you've seen these things, they could go anywhere from $5 to $20 million, depending on where they are. Once they're fully licensed, once all the other licenses are gone, once the green rush is over, this is the investment value. And that's, as a broker, where you can, where we haven't gotten to as a market yet. We haven't gotten to that point yet. We've seen it a few times, but we haven't seen the major flips yet. Even with the cultivation, like valuing a cultivation property is largely based on the availability of industrial product in the market. Industrial production is still pretty good through COVID. So it's really putting a strain on a typical building user. It's making it even harder for them to find buildings, because a lot of people are downsizing right now. And if I want to downsize from 50,000 square feet into 20,000 square feet, it's going to be very challenging, because the 20,000 square foot building, if it's in a green area, is going to have a lot of interest, and the price is going to be driven through the roof. you know, it'll be driven to a price where you can't even make sense of it on a real estate level. So when you're determining the value of cannabis properties, there's a lot to consider. And again, one of the biggest things to consider is the availability of the product in the marketplace. And another thing to consider, going back to time when you're determining value is huge. If I am the owner of a property and I get it licensed, I'm state pre-qualified. I'm not. Say I'm pre-qualified by the state, and I get my building licensed, and it's in Detroit for a Class C cultivation. Guy knocks on the door and says, I want to buy your building, and I want to grow here. And you tell him, oh, well, I just happen to have spent a year, going through the process of getting my Class C license in the city of Detroit for this property. If you can say that to somebody, there's, the value of that is still to be determined, but it changes for every deal. That's a very significant, benefit that you can provide as an owner of a property. So as a broker, those are the opportunities, again, as a listing agent or as a tenant, or as a tenant rep, that you want to look for is, okay, this guy has got this licensed property, or we already, it's received this approval, or he has build out plans for this. Any more that you have that is just an empty building in a green zone is going to increase the value, especially in a market that is hot, it's not out there right now, but if you're, and if you owned a building in Warren and got it approved, knew that it was approved for a grow building, you built it out and did everything and put it on the market, as a broker, I would advise that you'd make a significant return on that type of property at this time, because again, the inventory is low, and there's a big push from the grow market to get into industrial properties. One thing it's important to consider, I didn't talk about, financing. You have to see your client's finances before you start working with them, because a lot of times you're going to be either dealing with a cash transaction or a land contract. Lenders are few and far between. Your client may say they have access to a lender, or, oh, we've got a lender. You have to know who the lender is, because, there's a lot of games people can play, and the more information you have, the better. If you can be made aware of a lender, right, that's giving official loans out to cannabis users, that's a pretty good person to know. So there's, you want to just have those answers, know everything you can about your client. And once you have that with this portfolio, you really have all the tools, at least a basic roadmap to get started. I think if you look back at, some of the earlier slides, and you think of just from a real estate perspective, find a building in an area that checks off, these boxes. And within that city, there's going to be all these different, rules and regulations that you have to adhere to. So as brokers, if you can send a property to somebody where it's a green city, they support it, and it checks off all those boxes, again, your client is going to appreciate that value. There's a lot of reasons why cannabis isn't going anywhere, especially from a real estate perspective. We're really still at the beginning of this process. Hopefully you learned a little bit about it. I mean, you can jump all over the place when you talk about this. I tried not to get into too much detail because there's many layers of this stuff. And I'm more than happy to talk about it at any time. I'm going to leave my contact info, and my email address. I love talking about this stuff. It runs most of my day. So, I appreciate the opportunity. And again, I hope you learned something, and thank you.